Hey guys, Brian from Fantasy Labs. Thanks for watching. I did a video on the Thursday FanDuel ownership in a big GPP last week, and kind of just how we can take the ownership from a Thursday slate on FanDuel, since it locks, unlike DraftKings where you can late swap, so you can see the ownership percentages on every player from Thursday, and you can use it as a predictive tool for Sunday. And I did a video on that last week, and it was very well received. So I think thanks for the kind words and everything and support. And I'm going to do the same for this week. So it just came out. Again, this is from DFSreport.com, and they post this every Thursday night after the game starts, and I think they kind of compile it as fast as they can and get to it. So they entered the $2 snap. I think they entered just kind of the biggest one, and this one had 114,000 entries. So we're seeing a large sample here, which is good, because it obviously the larger the sample, the more predictive that we're going to get. So we'll go through this. And again, thanks to DFS Report for compiling this. Check their stuff out. They have some good stuff on their site. So this is ownership of Thursday, which we're not worried about because it's already passed. So let's start with quarterback. So Aaron Rodgers is number one, which I think is going to be interesting. I think that he is probably going to be right around this level on DraftKings. His salary actually has decreased all 4 weeks. He started at 8,600 in week one, and he went down to 83, I believe, in 81, and this week he's at 7,900. So it's interesting for players that play on Monday night. So the slate, so DraftKings and FanDuel, they have to release their slates in enough time for players and salaries to stay the same. So they actually release their slates on Sunday afternoon. So so players that play on Sunday morning, and I believe it's far enough in, maybe it's Sunday evening, where they factor in the performance of that week into the salary of the next week. But obviously for the Sunday night game and the Monday night game, they cannot factor that in just because they have to get the slates out. So even though Aaron Rodgers threw for the 5 touchdowns and went bananas last week, on Monday night, obviously, they released the slate before that. So the price dip was kind of based on the fact that he had just kind of around 20-point fantasy performances. And even though he kind of blew up on Monday night, they weren't able to factor that into his price, so he's down. So I assume that he'll be one of the top values, and we'll see him a lot. Andy Dalton is interesting. I think he's probably a recency bias play, but I do think that they will have a good game. Derek Carr, I figured, would be one of the top values this week, just because they are going against the Bears, and they're actually 3-point favorites right now on the road. So that means that Vegas kind of thinks that they're about 6-point favorites on a neutral field. So I expect that he is going to be really high owned. I figured it would actually be a little bit higher, but I think it's going to be a little depressed because of people wanting to take Latavius Murray. And yeah, we'll look at that in a second. I think that's true. The most interesting ones for me, to be honest, are Tyrod Taylor. He is just a massive value. He's still under 6K, and in that great matchup, I think that he might be a little bit lower, again, for the same reason Carr is, in that people want to roster Carlos Williams, and Carlos Williams probably would be the most popular play, which we'll get to in 1 second. So I think Tyrod Taylor's ownership might be a little depressed because people don't want to roster both of them because of that negative correlation. And Tank and I actually talked about that in the podcast on Wednesday, about the fact that we don't necessarily mind that. So that's something to look out for. I think I'm going to have a lot of Tyrod, not only because of the low ownership, but I think he's in a really good spot at a low price. And Andrew Luck, I know that there's some possibility that he doesn't play. So maybe this is kind of reflected in to that, because people obviously know that it's going to lock, so they can't switch him out. So maybe his ownership dropped a little bit. But if he's in a really good spot going against the Jaguars, and his receivers are really low as well. He's got Hilton and Moncrief, and they're both at a really good price on DraftKings. So I think they're really affordable if you want to stack one of those. But I think that'll be interesting to kind of see where the public's on Luck, and especially with his health situation and everything. So it's something to monitor. Moving on to running back, yeah, Carlos Williams. I figured he would be one of the top plays, and he is. He's at 26. I've seen in some of the other tournaments on the higher stakes that he was even as high as 30%. So it looks like a lot of the sharp players and really just the public in general are on Carlos. I expect that he would be the same, especially on DraftKings because they have a lower floor. So he's going to be massively owned everywhere. I think he's kind of a must start in cash. If you don't start him in your cash games, I think you might have some trouble winning this week. I think he might be a fade candidate in tournaments just because of that high ownership. I think I'll probably do a little bit of both, fade him plus roster him. I do think that there's some other options, especially if Marshawn doesn't play and Rawls gets the start, which we'll get to in a second. But yeah, he's going to be interesting whether you want to fade him or play him. I think I'm going to do a little both. Latavius is obviously going to be really popular. I probably will do the same thing with Carlos and Tyrod and Latavius and Carr and Amari is kind of get exposure to both. I think those offenses are going to go off and score a lot of points this week. So yeah, I wrote an article this week about kind of the negative correlations and how maybe we need to rethink that. But that's going to be interesting to see, if Latavius goes off, does that mean that Amari and Crabtree doesn't? And same for Carlos and Tyrod. So that's something I'm going to be watching this week because I think it's a really fascinating topic in DFS right now. Joseph Randle, I want no part of. He was a fluky play last week. He had, just a ton of yards and just a couple carries and then was awful after that. Don't want any part of that. Devontae Freeman, I don't mind going back to him in cash games. I don't think he has the upside that he did last week, but I don't mind. Matt Forte might be one of my favorite plays of the week at 8.5%. I love him. They're going to run the entire offense through him, and I think that he's got a lot of upside. The interesting one is obviously going to be Thomas Rawls and Marshawn Lynch, who's going to get the start. I think this is probably not necessarily predictive and reflective of where DraftKings is going to be, just because this is the Monday night game, and on DraftKings you can afford to put one of these in your lineup and just switch them out if they end up not playing. But on FanDuel, obviously you can't. So I think that probably people were pretty risk adverse and didn't want to roster either of them. That's why their salaries or their ownership percentages were so depressed. But if indeed we get some clarity before Sunday, I expect Rawls, especially if it's Rawls, who's at a bare minimum price on both sites. I expect him to be up way up here as well. I really like Ingram if Drew Brees doesn't play as well. That's really low for him at 3%. I think especially if Drew Brees doesn't play, maybe that's why his ownership's a little depressed this week, or at least in the Thursday slates, because there's some questions about Brees. James Jones, obviously with Devontae out, is going to be a really popular play, both him and Cobb. It's interesting to see that him so much higher than, because of the salary relief you're going to get from rostering one or the other. And I guess people assume that there's not much difference between Aaron Rodgers, number 1, and number 2 wide receivers, and that's fair. But I definitely understand that, and I'm probably going to fade in tournaments. And I don't even necessarily like James Jones in cash either, just because he's really touchdown dependent. I guess he may not be as much this week because there's just the targets probably are going to be there as well. But in general, very touchdown dependent, even though he's got a touchdown. So has paid off on that end. Fitzgerald has been going off. Julio, even no matter what, I think as long as he's under 30% and under 10K, I'm probably going to roster him in a ton of places. Amari is one that I want to talk about because the difference between him and Crabtree, here's Crabtree, is really interesting to me. So people are obviously targeting that Raiders offense, and I think that there's very good reason to, but obviously people are going on that Derek Carr, Amari Cooper stack, and I think that actually the really sneaky one could be Amari and Crabtree. Crabtree is getting a ton of targets, to actually get more targets than Cooper, and I think that that'll probably continue. He's definitely a guy that Carr looks for a lot. So I think that Crabtree, especially at this low percentage, you're going to get a really an offense with a high upside. But you're going to get it at the lower ownership. And if it's going to be that much of a difference, 20 versus 3.5, then I think I'm probably having a lot of Crabtree as a kind of a pivot off of Amari. And I definitely don't mind the combination. I don't mind the wide receiver double stack with Cooper and Crabtree in tournaments. I also like the same with Moncrief and TY this week if luck ends up going. But some interesting ones. I think that's about it. Yeah, Travis Benjamin's going to come back to earth. Yeah, these are the kind of my thoughts on those. Yeah, so in a non-Gronk week for tight end, obviously it gets ugly. I figured Greg Olsen would be the biggest play, and he is, just because he was targeted so much, and he's Cam's guy. And he had that big week last week, so I think he's probably the safe cash game play, and I don't mind him in tournaments. He's at 23, but that's probably right where he should be. The interesting thing to me is going to be where Jordan Reed and Zach Ertz are. I think they're two kind of interesting plays this week, especially Jordan Reed. I like him a bit, and I don't even see him on the list, so I assume that means that he's under 0.5% owned, which is a little crazy to me. So maybe I'm missing something, or I don't know. But that's something I'm going to roll with, and maybe it works out. And then as far as defenses goes, obviously Arizona is popular just because of their special teams and the fact that they've been playing so well. Denver's really interesting. They've actually pressured quarterbacks on 50% of dropbacks this year. And we know the correlation between getting in the quarterback into their pocket and forcing them into pressured quick throws, and the correlation between that and takeaways and interceptions is pretty high. So I do like them. I think Carolina might be the sneaky play this week. They get a rookie quarterback, and Jameis is always going to have those games where he's going to struggle a bunch. And I think that Carolina, we actually have them projected as the highest ceiling of the week in our model. So I really like Carolina as a tournament play. They're a little cheaper than Seattle, who's the highest, and I think that that they might be a little bit higher in DraftKings just because of the lower price floor. But I definitely like Carolina. Probably is my favorite play here. And Tank also in our podcast on Wednesday gave some kind of sneaky plays that he liked. So definitely listen to the podcast and check those out, because those are all going to be there's some of them that he said that weren't even on here. So you're getting them at just about no ownership, which is obviously good in a tournament. So yeah, so those are my thoughts on the ownerships. Thanks for watching. Again, let me know what you think. If you disagree or agree, let me know, and we can kind of talk it through. But let me know your thoughts, and that you still like it, and I'll continue to do it. So thanks for watching, and good luck in week 4.